have a great chat about the cardiac cycle. Great to me, at least. I want you to know that the word systole, or systole sometimes we call it, this means contraction of the heart, okay? So systole, or you can say systole if you prefer, it refers to contraction. And when the heart contracts, it actually contracts in two phases. But what it does, it empties, or it ejects. That's a nice way of putting it. It empties blood from the heart. So that's what systole is all about. And I also want you to be aware, because we're going to come back to this in a few minutes' time, that diastole refers to relaxation. The heart effectively returning from its contractile phase to being relaxed. And this is where the heart fills. Now, that's going to become relevant in a few moments' time. Now, before we get into the actual cycle of how blood circulates around the body, I want to remind you of the following. We have got 4 heart chambers. They don't seem to have appeared for me. Thought they were going to. Let me try. Maybe it was this layer. There we go. We've got 4 heart chambers. So I'm just reminding you of that. It's not particularly important information here, but just remember that this half of the heart is the right, this half of the heart is the left, and the atria are above the ventricles. So it's important to remember that. Now, with that understood, I'm actually going to get rid of those terms again because they're going to kind of get in our way a little bit. And I want it to introduce you to a little friend of mine. And that little friend of mine is going to start his journey up here. And despite the fact that he is green, he is a red blood cell. And I'm using green because it's not going to clash with the red on the image here. But guys, you guys are learning about red blood cells in your biology. You know they're biconcave disc. You probably know that they're 7 micrometers wide, that they fit perfectly down a capillary, all that stuff. All that is included in my assumptions here, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to follow this red blood cell on a journey. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to imagine this red blood cell returning here to this big blue vessel, which also has another sort of trunk to it here. Now, this blood vessel is called the Vena Cava. Now, because I've named a blood vessel here, I'm going to go straight away and kind of label that. And you see some other labels are coming in. We'll talk about those in a second. This big blood vessel here is the Vena Cava. And our red blood cell green will travel down that Vena Cava and it will find itself just here in the right atrium. Now, you should already be able to tell me is that when it fills up, when that right atrium fills up, you'll be able to tell me that that right atrium is going through diastole, right? Now, that right atrium then squeezes and empties, and it forces that green blood cell down through a valve, and now our green blood cell is down in the right atrium, okay? So we've made some progress here. We've got both systole and diastole going on. We understand that if the atria, or in this case the right atrium, goes through systole and forces it down, the right ventricle has to be in diastole, right? Has to be relaxing to receive that blood to fill. Now, the right ventricle contracts and squeezes inwards like this, and that green blood vessel, albeit red, is now going to shoot up and out of this blood vessel here, which we refer to as the pulmonary artery. So PA is our pulmonary artery, okay? And the pulmonary artery, pulmo refers to lung, is taking this blood cell up to the lung. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to bring in the whole of this circuit. So look, in this case, it's going to go up, it's going to travel along here, it's going to come out here, it's going to go here. This is obviously the force of the heart doing this, and it gets up to the lung. Now, at the lung, this is where gaseous exchange is going to take place. So any carbon dioxide that red blood cell is carrying is going to be deposited and breathed out. And it also, diffusion of oxygen from the alveoli into the blood, and therefore onto the red blood cell, can occur there. Now, our red blood cell is saturated with oxygen, and it starts travelling back down this vein here. This vein here, you see here, PV, this is the pulmonary vein. Okay, the pulmonary vein. Remember, veins always lead back to the heart. And look where it ends up. Our green blood cell, red, ends up back here in the left atrium. If it's entered the left atrium must be in diastole, right? So the left atrium then goes into systole, squeezes and forces our green blood cell, red, into the left ventricle. We've got a blood cell in the left ventricle. There'll be loads of others, obviously, here. The left ventricle contracts, systole, and forces that blood cell up and out through this little valve, up and out of the aorta, and it actually arches down and comes out here. So here's our red blood cell just here now, go back down and behind the heart. And if I bring in this next image down here, we've now got that blood cell traveling down from the aorta down to the rest of the body. Now, at the rest of the body, there's going to be more gaseous exchange, more diffusion. The oxygen is going to be delivered to the working muscles, for example. And then that blood cell is now going to be returned back to the heart. And it's going to return back to the heart. And look, it's going to come up here and end up back where we started in the right atrium. So we can describe this system as a double loop. Double loop. Now that's interesting because lots of other organisms, smaller mammals like rats and mice, they only have a single loop. We have a double loop. And if you think about the reason we might have that, is because although we're not a very large organism, we're large enough that the distance a red blood cell has to travel, let's say to get down to up to the lungs, down to the toes, back up to the heart, that's a long way, right? So we have this shorter circuit at the top, back to the heart, and then the heart pumps again and pumps it round to the rest of the body in that way. So that's a really, really critical point that we could make there. Now, a couple of things I want to stress to you. In this illustration, anything red here is oxygenated. Okay? And anything blue is deoxygenated. Okay? And that's really important for us to realize. Now, a great example of that would be something like our red blood cell just here, traveling up to the lungs. It's deoxygenated until it gets here. And now, of course, you see for the colour of the vessel, it's now red. Okay, now just be reassured that red blood cells don't actually turn blue. These blue vessels here don't actually turn blue. They do actually become less red, though, when blood is deoxygenated. But nevertheless, it's still red. So it's just for illustrative purposes. Okay, I think that's everything apart from one point that I want to make. Can I just stress to you that we, in that journey, in that adventure, pass through 3 valves. We've got one here, we've got one here, and we've got one here. So that is 4 valves in the heart. Now, there's actually other valves that blood's passed through. These are called pocket valves in some of the veins. But most importantly, I want you to know what the role of valves is. Valves, they prevent backflow. So, for example, let's just imagine that at this part of the journey here, we've got our red blood cell down here, green. Imagine that the systole occurs here in the ventricles, and this blood cell was forced back up into the right atrium. That wouldn't work, right? It has to go through here, and the valves prevent that backflow. In other words, they end up making blood flow one way. This is a one-way street, and if it's not, we're in big trouble, okay? And that's the role of valves around the heart. Thanks.